How I won with a single Webtoon episode. In this video, I would like to talk about how to create contest-winning webtoons, and why I believe it is a good idea to enter certain contests in the first place, even if you do not win, provided those contests have rules you find acceptable. Why enter a comic contest? Well, if you're like me, you may not have a large social media presence to advertise your comics. People often say that the cream always rises to the top, but I'm not so sure how true and tested that is when it comes to comics. Maybe you'll learn something here that can be applied to your own webtoons or comics, and win some contests of your own. And even if you do not win, there are still benefits to entering some contests, depending on their rules, which you should pay close attention to. You can create a beautiful comic with a powerful script and striking artwork, but if you do not have a large social media presence, which I do not, or you are not charismatic, I'm certainly not that, and if you are also bad at marketing, I'm doubly certainly bad at that. It can sometimes feel as if you are throwing your comic into a void once you release it, never to reach the eyes of potential readers. This can be quite disheartening at times, especially because it can take a lot of time, money, and effort to create even one single comic book. The purpose of a comic is to be read, and many great comics will go unread simply because it is so hard to get people to find them. Some people may just say, well, just become charismatic through practice, so you can become a suave streamer and sell books. Or they may say, learn how to market your comic. And these are certainly fun things to try to get better at, and certainly useful tips. But the study and practice of these things goes against the main purpose or goal a comic creator is striving for in the first place, to create truly entertaining and unforgettable comics or webtoons, which requires a lot of work in itself. Time spent on other skills means less time spent honing your comic craft. These days, a comic creator is expected to be able to do it all. And fair enough, if that is what is required, then so be it. But is becoming a charming and smooth-talking salesman who regularly uploads marketing content the only method to get your comic noticed? There are always hopes to go viral and so forth, but I'm not so sure that is the best method either. Just hoping for the algorithmic odds to favor you. So all of this is why I believe comic or webtoon contests are important. As long as the contest you enter in question has certain rules, like that the judges must review and score each entry, not skipping any, and that a weighted form of popularity is in place so that all entrants are given a more level playing field, certain rules that make it worthwhile to enter even as an unknown creator. If the contests do not have such rules, it may not be beneficial, but if they do, entering could be quite useful indeed. But why would you listen to me about this? What do I know? My credentials are that in late 2022, I won the first place grand prize in Webtoon's Call to Action contest, which had over 3,700 entrants or submissions, and I did it with a comic that, until the judges from Webtoon looked at it, maxed out with about 200 views and 40 subscribers over the course of a few months. I uploaded my entry on July 31st, 2022. By the end of September, or in some time zones October 1st of 2022, you can see from this screenshot I took how well my comic was performing, which is quite low in viewership as you can see, 200 views after 2 months. But because the rules stated that Webtoon would be scoring every eligible entry, that meant judges, regardless of my low viewership, would eventually have to read my comic, and then my comic would sink or swim on its own merits, rather than just falling into another void due to my lack of social media presence and terrible marketing skill. My small-time entry was up against much more popular entries with many more views and subscribers and comments, and some of those entries were from artists with already established fan bases. And yet my entry still won the top prize, which was $50,000 US, an animated short and a Webtoon Originals contract for Scale Hunters, my comic story. Use one episode max to tell us an engaging story with at least 60 panels to display your action-packed ideas, including a blood-pumping brawl between at least 2 characters. This was the main direction given for the 2022 Webtoon Call to Action contest. So how did my entry win when up against 3,700 other entries, many of which were much more popular than my own? Well, the main thing I focused on was the contest rules and requirements. It was a very clear and simple directive, and so, though I had been working on a much more complex comic story at the time, Scale Hunters, which had a lot of twists and turns and reversals, where action only played a component in that. To enter it into this contest, I needed to focus solely on a single battle scene from the story, which had not yet been written or drawn, in 60 to 70 panels, because there was a 20 megabyte upload limit requirement, and I did not want to reduce the image file size quality too much. I decided to give the backstory to the Scale Hunter's world setting quickly in the entry, in just a few very sparse text boxes to get readers up to speed so they would immediately understand the consequences of the battle being depicted that was about to take place in this single entry. The trade-off to doing this, of course, is that in doing so, not even a fraction of what my story was about is shown in the entry. But when you are entering a contest like this, I think it is best to keep it as simple and focused as you can, even at the risk of making your story seem unsophisticated to certain readers. Even if your actual comic story has much more depth, the companies running these contests are looking for very specific things, and in this case they were looking for action. So my goal was to hone in and whittle the entry down to the most basic components Webtoon was looking for: a blood-pumping brawl. In such a contest, I believe there is a tendency for creators to want to prove they can do more than simple action, so they will also want to put in other story aspects to show readers their story is not just fisticuffs. But in the end, doing so will potentially bog down the entry, and the action may get lost or no longer feel like the main focus of the entry. The impact lessens, and when a contest entry is about impact, that is not good. So, even if it is difficult, you as the creator need to resist the temptation to add too much extra information into the entry. Try to keep it as simple and precise as you can, and trust in your vision for the comics world, because there are still things you can do to imply a larger scope of your story in this small action scene, which I will now try to talk about. You see, Webtoon's directive for the action contest also includes the phrase, action-packed ideas. Ideas being the key word to me here. In some way, the entry needed to incorporate creativity within the action, some stylistic flair to set it apart. An ordinary slugfest would not cut it, no matter how cool or kinetic looking it is. That idea aspect of their direction seemed important, so I had to also make sure to include the magic system of Scale Hunters into the action sequence, which luckily was easy to do, as that is already how the setting of Scale Hunters works, scale battles being a somewhat common occurrence in the world of Scale Hunters. And what that magic system is that in the Scale Hunters world, certain people can use scales they take off the bodies of particular scaled creatures, and once the human who stole those scales from the creature crushed them into their bloodstream, the energy released within the scales briefly grants those humans unique abilities based on what creature they took those scales from, a la Mega Man or something, though with a variancy in potency of the ensuing scale magic depending on the proficiency of the scale user. So, rather than there being something like a nebulous mana pool for magic in this setting, there instead is a concrete and finite resource that creates magic, which in turn creates a survival horror aspect to the story. For example, even if you are an amazing scale magic user, what happens when you run out of scales? What if the pouch you store your scales in is stolen? This introduces inventory management and opens up a lot of other possibilities, so even the most powerful magic users in Scale Hunters can suffer drawbacks, and at times they must rely on more than just their magic to keep them alive. And on top of that, there is a rare type of scale, the fairy scale, that allows users of it to create custom scale magic based on their deepest desires and obsessions. Magic tailored to their specific needs, rather than always creating the same type of magic as the other preset scales do. These rare fairy scales introduce even more variety into the mix, and are even tied to the backstories of particular characters, to explain how their obsessions, which are depicted in visual form through their custom fairy scale magic, came about. What trauma led to the creation of these custom wish-granting abilities. But I also needed to make sure it did not take a long time to explain this magic system, and so I did it with a combination of show and tell, and even left out some of what I considered the most interesting aspects of the system, such as the custom creation magic. As our hero in this entry, Thomas, takes out a scale and crushes it to activate his scale magic, there is a very short word box that explains what the said scale he crushed does. In this case, it says something like Goblin Scale for numbers. And what happens in the next panel? Thomas's body multiplies. Now, you could have done this without the telling aspect as well, just have Thomas crush the scale and then we see in the next panel his body multiplies. But to connect it back to the short text boxes at the start of the entry that briefly told the world setting, it is sometimes good to give these small descriptive boxes to readers, and the repetition of these boxes implies a consistency to the flow of the story like pinpoints, rather than having one text box at the start and none thereafter. Now you have them throughout to create a certain rhythm. But before I talk too much about the flow of the story or the rhythm, let us look at the fine print of the 2022 Call to Action contest entry. The following information was not shown on the main contest page, but rather on the additional roles linked from that main page. The fine print, as I said, and the fine print clearly shows how the entries were judged and scored. Eligible entries will be judged according to the following criteria. Up to 10 points for narrative. The story has a strong plot and strong characters. Up to 10 points for readability. The story is easy to read on a mobile device. Up to 10 points for clarity. The story is delivered clearly and is easy to follow. Up to 30 points for action execution. The story's featured fight is well choreographed and paced, featuring impactful and dynamic action panels. First off, this showed to me that each entry was going to be judged and scored. Thus, it was beneficial to enter regardless of my lack of popularity, because the people at Webtoons would be reading it regardless of my poor social media presence. Let's look at 10 points for narrative, which is stated to be strong plot and strong characters. In my entry, through the sparse text boxes I used and also through Thomas's dialogue, I made sure to showcase the main plot, why he is doing what he is doing, and his strength in character, his goal, something simple but strong, to save a captured fairy from his opponent, because Thomas is on a path of redemption, as he was a former fairy slayer himself. Then, for his opponent, through his dialogue I gave him his own motivation, as he wishes to be the king of beasts, and speaks of something called the Dark Hook, which he praises, and which is an integral aspect to the plot of Scale Hunters, but not something we need to know too much about for this single action entry. Still, name-dropping it gives the character a sense of existence, as something other than an obstacle to be defeated, as he apparently has his own mission in life. And of course, it is smart to make sure both characters have very strong visual designs. It is important to have visually striking-looking characters for this type of contest. The 10 points for clarity, this goes back to my idea of making sure the script flows from one panel to another, which I'll explain more about in a bit. But as you can see, the big points here is 30 points for action execution, which proves that focusing mainly on the action is what you needed to do for this contest. Webtoon wanted action, so give it to them and jettison all your other great ideas, even if you like those ideas better than action, for this single entry at least. And then you would need to think of how each action causes a reaction in the next panel, and make sure while making your script for the action entry that there were many reversals in the battle scene, which I will now talk about. I might make another video on this later if anyone is interested, but once you have the main aspects solidified so that they satisfy the requirements for the contest you are entering, in this case it was showing an intense battle scene while also incorporating your creative ideas within it. You then need to make sure each panel flows into one another for the entry, and that you have a series of reversals from panel to panel, or what used to be called page turners in the olden days, a way to keep the reader engaged through the entire entry so that they want to read more by the end of it. In action scenes, I think reversals are very important to keep things interesting. Think of Yu-Gi-Oh! And its various card draws, which can turn the tide of the battles, which is probably a key reason why that franchise is so addictive to people. I like to have at least one reversal per action sequence, if possible, and even more when the battle is allotted more time. By this, I mean there should be panels in which one character gains the upper hand, only for a reversal of fortune to happen in the next panel, where now another character comes out on top, and so forth. And this does not have to apply to just action sequences. It is also important to use reversals when characters are speaking to one another. Think of it like you, as the writer, are sharpening the character's word balloon endpoints so that they can joust with their words, as it were, and not necessarily only in argument conversations either. Even friendly speech bubbles can joust, or rather, in their case it is more like tossing a ball back and forth from one character to another. You can have a back and forth in this manner to keep things lively in the script. This way you can also connect one idea to the next, and so forth. A character says one thing, and another responds to it. Then, their response triggers the next panel, which is related to what they said in some way, but in a different context or setting. This just makes the reading experience smoother than if it is just a script with a lot of stops and starts, disconnected dialogues, etc. Usually, a reader will not even realize you are doing this, because they will be reading it so smoothly from panel to panel. But when you take a step back and look at it, you will see how generally the lines of dialogue all relate to one another in some way until you reach the end of the episode, like a needle threading its way from top to bottom. Or at least that is my ideal. Sometimes this is not possible due to time or panel constraints, but for a contest entry, it should be possible to hone your script to this level, especially if enough time is given for the upload deadline. Now, remember my advice here applies to comic contests in which whoever is hosting the contest are going to actually read and score all entries, and that they have some weighted form of a popularity score, where the most views or subscribers does not completely invalidate the smaller entries. If you can't find such proof the host will honor these, then, well, I still think my advice for creating the specific contest entry is sound, but I can't guarantee it would even matter if the contest itself is not sound. Webtoon did seem to read and judge every eligible entry, at least in the 2022 contest I took part in. I have not kept up to date since. But other companies, I guess it is a good idea to look at their fine print on their rules and regulations before entering. But now, what about popularity, or the lack thereof? A maximum of 60 points may be assigned to each entry by the panel of judges. Determination of the honorable mentions, finalists placed from 4th to 10th, 3rd place prize winner, 2nd place prize winner, and grand prize winner will be based on the judge-assigned score, 60%, and the level of audience engagement through Webtoon, 40%. In Webtoon's case, in the 2022 call to action entry at least, they did have an engagement score of sorts, but it was something based on the number of views to subscribers and comments, that type of thing, and it accounted for 40% of the score, which is quite a lot. But that was the key, the way it made things fair, I believe. Their method of audience engagement did not mean number of views. It meant ratio of views to subscribers, comments, things like this. So in fact, in the contest, it was not necessarily advantageous to get a huge number of views if you were also not getting a decent ratio of subscribers to those views. So let's say you advertised your entry somewhere which gave you a lot of views, but you advertised it on a website where the members did not all have Webtoon accounts to then subscribe to your entry. So they just read it, said it was cool to you on the other website you advertised it on, and then they left the Webtoon website without subscribing or leaving a comment there. So what you actually did, I believe, through that advertisement was lower your engagement score once the judges looked at it, or at least that is how I perceived how it worked in the 2022 contest, based on my understanding of the rules that were made available publicly on their website. In my case, I believe I ended up with a decent views to subscribers ratio for the scoring portion simply because I had such low views. My advice there then is, if you do upload an entry to such contests, probably do not constantly refresh or look at your entry because that may unnecessarily bump up the view count without increasing engagement. It is best to just forget about your entry for a while until the judging process happens, though this may not matter depending on how the site counts unique views or not. But again, this was just how I believe the 22 contest worked. It may not be like this on other contests, so as always, read the fine print and tailor your entry and how you approach sharing it to those specifications. Now, what about the art for the contest entry? This depends on if you are an artist or not. If you are an artist, you need to decide if it is worth your time and effort to create the entry and enter it, even if you lose. If you are a writer and feel your own artistic skills are not up to par for the contest, you can certainly commission an artist to draw your script if it is allowed in the contest rules. In this case, you will likely be paying the artist up front, or during page completions, or at the end of the completion of the entire entry, or 50% up front, 50% at the end. However you and the artist decide payment should be set up, regardless on if you win the contest or not. So make sure that if you do win, that whatever you pay the artist will be covered by the winnings. But also be sure that you are okay with losing and not getting those funds back. You need to make sure you can accept that even if you lose, that you do not mind losing the money it took to commission the art, because creating the comic itself should be your main goal. I certainly did not expect to win or even place in this contest. My goal was to use the contest as a way to get eyes on my comic, as I noticed the judges would have to read my entry after I read the rules and regulations. If you are in a situation where you feel you have to win to get your funds back, maybe you should not enter in the first place. It is a risk. So take your situation into account if you cannot afford to lose that money. Now, what happens if you lose? In the case of the 2022 Call to Action contest, that was not necessarily a bad thing overall. I have noticed that more than a couple Webtoon originals started off as entries in the Call to Action contest that did not place in the top 3. But because Webtoon judged each eligible entry, they came across all of these other great webtoons that they still offered contracts for. Still, keep in mind the time, money, and effort that goes into creating a comic contest entry, and judge for yourself whether you are okay with entering even if it does not result in an originals contract. For me, the reach of a Webtoon Originals is much more vast than what I can personally do on my own. So in my case, it was a good call to enter the contest and sign a contract for Scale Hunters to become a Webtoon Original. After all, remember that my entry only had 200 views for 2 entire months. That is the extent of which I could do on my own. At the end of the day, audience reach is extremely important in getting your comic read. I will certainly try to become more charismatic and try to learn how to market my stories and all of this, but the thing I am mainly interested in is telling stories in comic book form, and that is where I would prefer to focus my efforts. And so, I believe entering comic contests is a good method for people like me, who are mainly obsessed with working on their comic scripts and stories, but lack other important skills. The chance to share my stories on a larger scale than I have ever known is something I'm grateful for, and I was able to do so by entering the Webtoon contest. I hope my video will help someone out there who is also struggling with getting people to read their own comics. Entering a contest is not the singular answer. It will not solve all the problems, but it is an avenue worth looking into if you are willing to lose but open to winning. Again, just make sure the contest's rules and regulations are advantageous to you before all else. Read all the details. Read the fine print. If you have any questions about winning comic contests or creating webtoons in general, please let me know in the comments below. I could also try making more videos about webtoons if you are interested. Thank you very much for your time.